Well, welcome back to Café con CJ, and good evening, y'all. Look who we have here, Charles McKenzie. I can't wait to talk to Charles. He's an icon in our community. Some of our regulars are here, but Charles McKenzie is a visiting guest. I've known you, I think I've known you 20-some years, man. It's been a long time. You've been an educator, a political figure. Charles is soft-spoken today, but let me tell you, we've done together, I produced a play where he was the only star, and he played MLK. There is not a better theater guy in the world. I tell you, if you'd gone to Hollywood, you'd be a household name. But, you stayed with us here and tried to be political. I think it was a bad decision, except that you've helped a lot of good people and changed the world. But, Charles, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, tell us something a little bit about you. I go around the room, and we're going to introduce everybody, but tell the people watching and listening about Charles McKenzie.
Well, I've been in public education now for about 40 years. I've been an ordained minister. I've pastored churches. I've been an advocate and activist with farm workers, labor rights,
absolutely
rights. Mm-hmm. I've worked with people who are really icons in the human advocacy arena. And I've worked with people like you who are very passionate and compassionate and have done a lot of things that have gone unsung, but you didn't do them to be seen. You did them to make a difference, and I have the highest regard for you and the difference you've made in many lives, even mine.
Thank you, Charles. I love you. You're one of the few people in this world that I really admire and respect, and I mean that sincerely. You're a good man, and I hope you're here for another 100 years, and you do the kind of great things you do. And I'm glad you're here because you're very knowledgeable. You don't have to agree with my position or anybody's position. Just come to it from a place of knowledge. For me, Charles, if somebody says he's a Christian, that's wonderful. But if that's all you know, you probably don't know anything. I mean, you should study Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and then come back to me and talk about Christianity. That's how I like to do things. Not that you're necessarily wrong, but study the world. Education, you as an educator understand this. You got to know where you've been to know where you're going. You have to study and understand and use your mind. If you believe in God, He's given you a mind. If you don't, you still have a mind. Use it. Don't you agree?
Absolutely.
All right. Cesar Garcia, little CJ. Sakakaka, as we called you before. I won't do that again. How you doing that? I can't use that. Look at that. You're all pissed off at me. Welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. It's good to be in good company. And Reverend McKenzie, as I've known him.
Well, we don't call him Reverend McKenzie right now, do we, Charles? Or you call Reverend?
You call me whatever you want.
A good man. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you, sir, whatever you want. No, but it's great to be here. I'm excited. Anytime that Charles is around, we have a very lively discussion. And I think Charles has been wanting around too with our other guest here today, Mr. Clayman Kid, if I remember correctly.
That was a few years ago.
Well, Charles called me, I want to say a few months ago. He's like, hey, you remember that young man when we were at the Cuban restaurant?
Right.
He's like, I want to talk to him again.
Yeah.
I was like, Charles must have been really bored that day.
That's why I brought Charles in today, because he's at a disadvantage. He's not feeling 100%.
Well.
No, he's not. And that'll give Clayman an opportunity.
That's all right. You're not even a small enough edge, though. I don't think so. No, but it's great to be here. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you. We have a great topic tonight. We're going to be talking about the woke doctrine, about the founding of our nation and what it's all about, and throwing a little bit of what's going on in the news. But go ahead, Clayman, introduce yourself. Clayman Kid, what are you up to? Tell us.
I'm Clayman. I am a law graduate. I've said that the last couple of weeks. I'm here basically to just talk about the conservatives in Florida, some of the things that they've been doing, some of the laws they've been changing, and things that DeSantis has been signing off on.
Awesome. I think what we'll do is tonight we'll start, and as always in our format, that first, thank everybody for watching Café con CJ, Sin Pelos en la Lengua. I'm hoping Cesar va a hablar un poco de español porque tenemos gente que habla español con nosotros. Last time you were a very white man, even though you're Latino.
Too much Spanglish.
Yeah, you need to speak a little bit more Spanish.
That's
but
right.
I wanted to talk about this concept, we the people. This doctrine of discovery, and you all know some of this, that our early popes in the 1400s, they had this papal bulls. They were written for the Western man, like the conquistadors that were coming to the New World. And it was called the doctrine of discovery, that if you invade and search out and capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans whatsoever, the enemies of Christ, who or wheresoever placed, to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and their use and profit. So that was from Pope Nicholas V. And one of the popes had written these papal bulls that gave the power of Western white man to come to the New World. No, absolutely. It's called the Doctrine of Discovery. And the church in Europe was saying to the nations of Europe, essentially, wherever you go, whatever land you find, not ruled by white Christian rulers, those people are subhuman, and their lands are yours for the taking. That's the basis of when guys like Christopher Columbus and the conquistadors in South and Central America and what they did to Mexico came across with, And speaking of that, if you think about that, we have a national holiday that was Columbus Day. Remember, that was always the gig where we honored a man who was lost and allegedly discovered these new lands. Now, when he discovered these new lands, there are already millions of people that were living here. The argument is always, how do you discover something that millions of people already here? Yeah, you cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. That's just the bottom line. So this guy and others like him were going with this doctrine that the papal bulls, pushed. It's clearly that this is a racial implicit or bias, a racial bias that our nation was founded on, because we're even honoring, our country's honoring this concept from the papal bulls. People of color and indigenous people are not fully human. That's what those Christian doctrine was used for us to come for these people to come here. This doctrine of discovery is white supremacist doctrine, and the history shows in 1763, King George, drew a line on Appalachian Mountains and said, basically, you can't go west, and the colonists were all upset about that. No, we should be able to go and go west. And they wrote this letter. They were upset, and they returned it back, and it was written on July 4th, 1776. And what they talked about is that they had the right to go west and to inhabit and take control of the merciless Indian savages. That was literally 30 lines down in that document that starts with all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence. It refers to Indians as merciless Indian savages. That, if you think about it, that sort of makes our Declaration of Independence a racist document, a white supremacist doctrine.
The concept you're talking about, people are less than human, made its way into the Constitution.
Well, how about that? We the people, right? Article 1, Section 2 of our Constitution. A couple things that come out here. It talks about 51 times the pronouns of he, him, his, never a female pronoun. The Constitution is not about women, right? It says it specifically excludes Native Americans, because the Constitution, in that part of the Constitution, tell you who gets rights, who doesn't, who is we the people. It's not women. It's not Native Americans. And right there it said that African Americans or Africans are 3/5 of a person. They're not full human. That's what's drawn in our Constitution. And so it was described or done for white land-owning men. There's the ones who could vote. That's what we the people is about. It's not Charles. It's not you for sure. You're the only one in the room 100% that this was written for. I mean, I'm a mixture of everything, but when I was in South Africa during apartheid, if you had 1% black blood, you were ostracized. A lot of people hid that. But that's how white supremacists, when they determine if you're white or not, is do you have a percentage of any other blood in you, right? You probably don't. I think you're white, 100%. But you
Pretty
look
much.
like it.
Well,
yeah.
they say history repeats itself, because I think that what you're talking about, the papal bulls and stuff that were written in the 1400s gave birth to, after the United States was an actual country, to what the concept of manifest destiny, which was the exact same thing that happened in the 1800s, where they said, well, we have the right, we're God-given, we're God's chosen people. So that was the excuse that they used to slaughter the Native Americans, to take over Mexico, anything else, so a lot of that concept, it was birthed from this doctrine that you're talking about. Absolutely.
But I was going to say that it would fit him, but he doesn't even qualify, because it's white land owning Americans. You own land now?
Not
No, you
currently.
can't even vote, dude. You're nobody yet, because there's a lot of bad white guys that are poor. We can't have white poor men. We got to have land owning white people, right? So if you think about it, women still make 70 cents to the dollar of men. Constitution is working. Prisons are filled with people of color. You know firsthand about discrimination and wrong in sentencing, right?
Prison industrial complex.
Say that again?
The prison industrial complex.
Right, and it's filled with people of color.
Of course.
A Constitution's working. Citizens United, 2010. What is it? A corporation has the rights of a human being? Have you heard of that? It's a person?
Treat it like a person.
Right. So it's designed to protect the interest of what? White land-owning people, the mega wealthy. It's our Constitution is a white supremacist document. Can you say that?
It is in. I think when we look at it,
The founding documents.
the founding documents, and we look at the sentiment that drove them, we could say very much that it was a white male-oriented kind of effort, and the all men created equal was not for people of color or women. It was designed for them. But as would be the case, Jefferson and the rest of them that put that document together put some principles in there that are universal, that later on people of color and women use.
Well, natural law. Are you saying? You mean something where human rights?
Certain things about the fact that people should not be treated unfairly or have equal protection under the law.
So you think that the forefathers they knew that the politics of the time wouldn't allow them to write bigger, or is this that is something they were building for the future?
I believe that no. I believe that the document and many things enshrined in it is larger than the mentality.
Well, I think you bring up something that's very interesting, and it was not what I was going to talk about, but is that to me the Constitution, because there are people who literally define it. It doesn't say anything about abortion in the Constitution. I say, oh no, dude. The Constitution is a living document that changes with time as people change. That's why the Supreme Court created the right of privacy. There's no clearly enumerated part of the Constitution, federal Constitution, that talks about privacy is where we get Roe v. Wade and abortion rights. Basically, it's not about abortion. They're saying that government doesn't have a right to go into your body, and it's being an evolving document. It's not literally written.
Well, you talk a lot about checks and balances,
Right.
right? And the Constitution itself, within the Constitution, has its own checks and balances. The opportunity for the population as a whole to be able to change it if needed. You had prohibition at one point, and then through the amendment process.
But we don't want the document to change, and let me explain that. I don't want the Constitution to be opened up and changed.
No. Well, the thing is, if that was the case, we don't have suffrage, right? Women's suffrage, things of that nature. So if it wasn't for the ability to be able to negate some of that, we have the biggest problem in the state of Florida, where they put on the Constitution, pigs have rights, this, that, and the other. I mean, the problem is, I think that should come from the Supreme. Sex is illegal,
right? It should come from the Supreme Court more than it should become than opening up the document and changing it all the time. What do you think, Charles?
Well, I think, as I stated earlier, that there are some foundational principles in it. Not that every part of it was designed to provide opportunities that are global, that were inclusive of women and people of color. But there are some fundamental principles.
True. Where I'm
that
going,
were utilized by people like Dr. King and others in
right?
the civil rights movement.
But that was a little bit later.
It was later, but But it was in these foundational principles that a lot of the passion behind the civil rights movement was driven. And Dr. King would say things like, it's a strange paradox that we have slavery and segregation in a nation founded on the principles that all men are created equal. So he would
except that blacks weren't considered men, and neither was indigenous people, Latinos.
We know the analogies around.
Well,
that.
how about this? Where I was going with this, and there's a Native American named Mark Charles that I got this information from, where I've stole everything from him. He's brilliant. Look him up. He's saying the foundation of the United States is started, and most countries at that time, on white supremacy, racist ideals. I always equate it to alcoholism or a drug addiction. If you're an alcoholic, you cannot overcome your alcoholism until you admit you're an alcoholic. Like the nation is divided, we need to admit, when we talk about the woke doctrine and stuff, we will in a second, is that we are born from racism and slavery and inequality. But you're correct. A lot of the forefathers that wrote this stuff were smart enough to include things that with the Constitution changing.
I would say sort of. I think estaban tan metidos, it's like in the Latino culture, right? Los católicos, they go to church maybe once a month at Easter or once a year at Easter, right? And but they're devout, right? Their belief in this ideology, I think that's what the founding fathers, they believed so much in their bullshit and what they were writing, and so they included these God-given rights, these unalienable rights, as they called them, because they really believed it was just for them, exclusive. I don't think they really thought that, in the future this is going to open doors. No, and they just believed their shit so much
that they were
they were really
that is why,
God's sent to earth.
That is why I said included in that, not intentionally, because I don't think that was their vision.
Okay, I misunderstood. So
I miscommunicated. I was saying that there were principles enshrined in it that, in spite of the fact that it was patriarchal and it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant to a great extent, it was not a document that was intended to embrace all these other things that it has become identified with.
Well, the guy who I love, Mark Charles, was trying to say where he quoted a gentleman, George Erasmus, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share the same past, there can be no real community. So what we have in this country is a chasm of division, where white America sees maybe I would say a mythological history of discovery, expansion, exceptionalism, and opportunity. Colored America sees something else, because colored America is not just black, it's Latino, it's Japanese. They have the lived experience of stolen land, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow, the border schools, the ethnic cleansing, genocide, Indian removal, and internment camps. Remember the Japanese in World War II here in our country? Segregation, mass incarceration, separated families at the border, dehumanization of immigration. That's the memory. That's the shared thing of people of color. White people see something different. This is part of that, in my opinion, what we see with what wokeness was to, really, woke has been to denote that a person should be aware of the structural inequity and informed of the nuances of racism and all that. It's about educating yourself to the truth of the history of the country, not the mythology that white America believes in. And then what we have, Governor DeSantis and others stepping on wokeness, making it more whiter than white, trying to keep that divide. So where I'm going with this is that I was trying to say, Charles, that our foundation of our country is done on white supremacy. Okay, maybe with beautiful ideas. I agree with you. You both made a great point. But it was for them, not for everybody else, not for Black America and Native Americans.
It was selfish in nature.
But for us to heal our division, absolutely, like an alcoholic, we have to say we were damn racist. Now, I'm not going out and saying we need to pay every black person that came from slavery and every
Reparations.
right. I don't that might be good. That's another topic. What I'm saying is we got to admit we're alcoholics or we're drug addicts, and we're like started on racism, and now we got to heal. We got to come together, and this is why wokeness is important in school. And woke means educate your dumbass to the truth of our nation and our history, so that we can now move forward together.
And I agree with that. I think a part of the problem is ideological.
All right, talk to me.
And cosmological and sociological and theological. I think that the human species itself has been inundated with the notion of separation, that we're separate. And I think science comes along and tells us everything in the universe is connected. We're more connected than we realize. And I think we've had voices come along and say, you're much more connected than you realize. And what happens over here shows up over there, because life is circular. For example, we can talk about the mid-Atlantic slave trade.
Okay.
And the potentially millions of Africans who perished along that route. But then if we fast forward to World War II, hundreds of millions of people died during that war, and they were not African.
True.
So human beings have been victimizers. Human beings have been exploiters. Human beings have been barbaric.
When I say we're white supremacists document, I've also said, what I've said in the past is that blacks are racist too. Latinos are racist against
Tenemos el problema con la misma raza. Let's talk about that for a second. Whitewashing. I was listening to the episode from a few weeks ago, and he said whitenized, but I think the term he meant to say was whitewashing. In the Latino culture, if you go on Univision, Telemundo, if you watch the novelas, La Rosa de Guadalupe, esto y que el otro, the people that they portray on these programs, they're light skinned. They're all white looking. They look very white.
Racist.
And so when you have someone like in the recent Black Panther movie, Tenoch Huerta, right, who is a darker colored Latino, he's one of those few people that make it. And I was reading his story, interesting story, even though he recently got into some trouble, it sounds like, but don't we all? Part of the problem is even in the Latino culture, like my youngest son, Junior, he's the darkest out of all my kids. My oldest daughter is very white. Her mother's white. She's half white. So, siempre mi mamá, mi güerita, or con mi hijo, my youngest, mi pretito, el prieto, qué prieto salió. And we,
mi negra.
Yeah, well, we
use color. They use color as a time of endearment. Without even
thinking about it,
my white kid, my black, my dark,
to separate. And I don't think it's intentional. It's not. They don't really mean it negatively, but we use color as a term of endearment. Whereas for many years, and I catch myself too. So it says, mi pretito, but that's just how I grew up too. It says, es un problema. It's a problem that we have because we want to emulate that which we think is the standard. Right. And this is something that last time CJ talked about too on the program, how the reason that Latin America is failing, and this I found this really interesting, that episode you showed me on YouTube, is because they try to emulate what the Spaniards did or the Europeans did, their system of government based on hierarchy and last name. And that's why America worked, because they just cut the cord and said, we're doing our own thing. But even now in the Latino culture, just check it out. It's all white. The people that they look up to, todos son like...
There's only been one Mexican president with indigenous blood. Because if you go to the National Palace in Mexico, and there's a painting by Diego Rivera. I went to see it. It's amazing on the walls there. And there is a conquistador raping the native woman. They raped all the women they could. Most of the Mexicans are short, dark, mestizo people. But when the conquistador married, they brought the woman from Spain. And that's the class that controls. Only one Mexican president has had native blood. Everyone else, even look at Vicente Fox, he's like 8 foot tall. I mean, come on. It's because they're all white. Because they married
Harvard educated.
Well, forget about that.
I mean,
forget about that for a moment. I'm just talking about race. And the leaders of the countries are generally white, unless there's been a revolution. But and that's an interesting thing that you're talking about race. Charles, you look like you want to say something.
Well, what I was about to say is that notwithstanding, there is racism and colorism, and there has been from the foundation of this republic. But I believe it's deeper than that.
All right, talk to us.
You talk sometimes about something called tribalism,
Right.
which is beyond just ethnicity.
Right.
race.
You could be in the military and or police officers. You're black. You're just like them. Yeah.
And then when we look
Otherism.
when we look at human history, we look at Europe, for example, and we can talk about white people and the very tragic things they've done, colonialism and all of the imperialism and that has wreaked havoc across the earth. But we look at what Europeans have done to each other. We look at the Anglo-Saxon wars. We look at the
Peloponnesian Wars.
Peloponnesian wars. We look at the violence that they heaped upon themselves.
Even the
in their own
Crusades.
culture. Yeah, well, the Crusades went into Africa and other places too. But when we look at human history, we see these tragedies.
Right.
That's not to downplay racism and colorism, but I think it's a branch on a tree that is rooted in some cosmological, theological, and philosophical ideas that human beings have about each other. Henry David Thoreau said this. He said, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one digging at the root. And I think the root cause of the problems we have in the world is human beings think they're separate. They think they're separate, and as long as I think you're separate and not a part of me, and that what I do to you has no consequences to me,
True that.
we're going to have a recurring
And how do you? I
experience.
agree 100%. Clayman, do you have anything you want to say on what Charles and Cesar and I are talking about? I mean, you're. I'm just curious, honestly. You're as white as it comes for me. Do you
Right, I'm pretty
feel?
white.
Do you feel on what we were talking about when I look back and I listen to Mark Charles and I mean, do you think that there is that difference? Were you raised in? I know your dad was a West Point grad, if I'm correct.
That's right.
He didn't stay in the military long, but he's a West Point grad. You're very progressive, I believe. Do you feel that you were raised to understand sort of like what we're talking about? Do you think that was taught properly, or how
Not
do
at
you
all.
view that?
It was definitely taught the way that you're kind of describing it as white nationalist or white supremacist. The history of America that I was taught growing up is incredibly whitewashed. We learn about Manifest Destiny, Declaration of Independence. We learn about all of these concepts like natural law, self-evident truth, equality of persons, limited government, popular sovereignty, inalienable rights of life. Those are all, in my view, lies that have been...
Why do you say that? I'm curious. I know you're. I don't want you
the
to try to fit
Constitution
in.
is, in fact, a white supremacist document. Every signer of that was a person with political power and property. They were self-interested in creating a government that allowed them the right to own various property rights
Control people.
and control people and what they do. If you can own land and you own every mineral that comes from the land, and then you can say, I'm the boss of this land and I will hire someone to extract these things. That person is now your agent doing exactly as you say, taking pay, but you're the one that owns everything. They will never own it. They can make money and then get into an industry that the government allows them to, another private industry, and make money that way. But they're essentially just doing the same thing as their boss was. It's owning something that they really probably shouldn't be able to own. It's a communal thing. We all live in the area. We all need these resources. But the Constitution was set up to allow a very select group to have control over all of it, and then for those people to make decisions about who gets to control what parts of this.
You think we've had a lot
System.
of change? Charles is talking about, MLK and the changes that they took from this document that, let's say, I agree with you, that was written for them.
It was
Absolutely.
written for them, but I just want to be a little more clear. It's the foundational document to a government. It was intended to have thousands and thousands of laws made on top of it, which is what's happened. And when we have a population of people that are being oppressed by the laws, it's easier for them to point to the Constitution and make an argument that says your laws aren't being applied to us fairly, or they can point to one of the lies. Essentially, you can point to the equality of all persons. You could point to popular sovereignty. You could say, I have inalienable rights. It's easier for a group of people to do that and succeed than it is for them to just violently oppose the government. The government is in charge. They have all the weapons. The only reason that the Constitution, that this country has become less white supremacist is because it's harder to just kill everyone, really. Or it's not, I mean.
So, I mean, what are you saying? That the white supremacy would still be part of this if MLK doesn't do his thing and others? I mean, what do you think?
I don't think
is that,
I'm saying
we haven't evolved?
I'm trying to say that the country is designed for white supremacists by white supremacists, and it's not intended to allow anyone else to have any amount of power. They end up taking power because the government is essentially afraid of a violent uprising. So over the history of this country, minority groups have taken all the power that they can, but the reason they're still not treated equally or viewed as equal by many people is because they were never intended to under the Constitution, and we're still being taught these lies.
You last night we got to speak at an event in Lakewood Ranch, quite interesting, and I asked you to bring up, and we were talking about DeSantis, the immigration law, and then about other laws because in my opinion, lack of checks and balances in our state, the Republican House, Senate, and the governor have rammed through. Do you want to talk about that? And then if any of those apply to what we're specifically talking about in the Constitution, and before the night ends, in which we could be here for, guys like us will probably be here all day thinking and talking about this stuff. And but the reality is, what can we do as Latinos, as African American, brown and black, and progressive whites and others? What can we do to have a more inclusive, more woke, if I'll use it in a positive way, type society? So first, let's hear him real quick.
So I think education is extremely important. I wanted to talk about some educational changes that are happening in Florida. Particularly what's of interest to me is public education. So what we're teaching just the masses in Florida, just our students K to 12. It used to be, as of in 2021, it used to be that our education laws looked kind of similar to most other states, but as Ron DeSantis has taken on this Stop Woke campaign, if you will, he has included provisions that don't allow our educators to talk about many aspects of inequality that are in our country today. So specifically, I want to point out some red flags that are just in our education code. Public schools are mandated to teach about the history and content of the Declaration of Independence, including national sovereignty, natural law, self-evident truth, equality of all persons, limited government, popular sovereignty, inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, and how they form the philosophical foundation of our government. Again, I think these are just a bunch of lies saying the government is supposed to work this way, and it does. And that's what they teach you. The government works this way. It works this way. It works this way. It works this way, but it doesn't in reality. The arguments in support of adopting a Republican form of government, but they won't teach the arguments against. Flag education, including proper flag display and flag salute. Mandated to teach about American history, and that's defined as the creation of a new nation based largely on the universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence, which again called Native Americans savages.
You had mentioned, I think yesterday, I remember you were talking about that they have the wokeness stuff. I mean, they have to teach.
So the wokeness stuff went from in 2021. We have a section here talking about the history of African Americans. In 2021, that was 4 lines long. Now in 2022 and 2023, that section is 19 lines long, where they specifically say basically what cannot be talked about. It says that instructional personnel may facilitate discussions to address in an age-appropriate manner which is a huge red flag, by the way, just that they included in an age-appropriate manner, talking about racial discrimination and slavery. How the individual freedoms of persons have been infringed by slavery, racial oppression, racial segregation, and racial discrimination, as well as other topics. However, classroom instruction and curriculum may not be used to indoctrinate or persuade students to a particular point of view inconsistent with the principles enumerated in Section 3, which is just the fundamental truth that all persons are equal before the law and have inalienable rights. Kind of. I say it's just that, but they go on to specify no person is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, solely by virtue of his or her race or sex. People based by virtue of race or sex do not bear responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. They've put in this new education bill a bunch of provisions saying what can and can't be talked about, how we're supposed to talk about these things, and it's incredibly destructive to just history and truth generally. We're saying that white people shouldn't feel bad about injustice that's occurred in the past. Okay, but to not talk about the injustice that's occurred in the past, which is what's happening here, because teachers are afraid to talk about these things.
We have a teacher here,
well,
so I want your opinion.
I'm not afraid to talk about it, and I've insisted on continuing to teach.
What did you teach in schools? What subjects?
I was interviewed by the Sarasota Herald Tribune, and they asked me about this whole process of trying to sort of censure what happens in the classroom. And I said to them, if you teach history globally, if you teach it the way it ought to be taught, you don't have to worry about these so-called provisions that DeSantis has put in place. Because if you talk about, for example, African enslavement, you have to talk about African enslavement from a broad perspective. You talk about the Europeans who enslaved Africans, but you also have to talk about the Africans who benefited from selling slaves. Africans into slavery.
Absolutely.
You can talk about white slave owners who were brutal, but you also must talk about the white abolitionists who were against slavery. And I think when you teach it globally, there's no room for anybody to feel left out or to feel that they've been put upon. And I think young people do need to understand you're not responsible for the problems of the past, but you are beneficiaries of a system that promulgated inequity. And it is incumbent upon you to take a real good look at that and decide where you want to fall.
But Charles, I think this shows that all teachers are not created equal. Because and what I mean by that is that, I mean, you're a learned man. I mean, I would love to have been your student. You would teach me things that I'm sure that my teachers didn't. You know what I'm saying? It's that in your classroom, that's what's going to happen.
Yes.
But I don't know if it happens in all classrooms.
It doesn't. I mean, I'm not that old, and I can still remember the indoctrination that we went through going through high school. And Clayman's a little closer to that than I am. But you're talking about, I'm sure you were the AP student with the classes in the U.S. history and world history and everything. So when we're going through those classes, why am I familiar with Manifest Destiny and with the papal doctrine and all? Why? Because that's what they taught you.
Weren't you class valedictorian in high school?
At some point, yeah.
Were you a class valedictorian? Were you?
Yes,
I hate guys like that. If I got a C, I was happy.
But here's where rubber meets the road. When I remember in AP US history, we started talking about the 1800s and the expansion of America.
Right.
And that's where this Manifest Destiny doctrine was taught. But it was taught from the perspective of they were meant to take this land. They were sent to do this. And I'm not saying you taught it. I'm saying the person that taught me gave it a point of view of, oh yeah, this was supposed to happen. The only difference is that my grandfather, may he rest in peace, as far as I can remember, siempre, estos pinches gabachos que me quitaron todo, esto y todo, because he swore que él era Azteca, he had Aztec blood, and that if it wasn't for that, he'd probably be the richest man in the world, because whatever, the Louisiana Purchase or whatever the hell happened, half of that was his family's territory that they took. And I grew up listening to this, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I'm hearing this, I'm like, wait, we're talking about the Louisiana Purchase, we're talking about Mexico and the border, and I'm like, well, my grandpa didn't say it that way. He thought this was evil shit, right? So at a younger age, I had a different perspective, but I think oral history is really important. You know,
I just say you can't be together, just like you said, tribalism. We can't be together until we're all in the same tribe in this country. As long as we're split up into different tribes, it's going to be hard for us to work together.
I think as long as we see each other as separate.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's
we are the same, but we think we are different.
Yeah. I mean, there's from
how about
the purely scientific standpoint, we're all modern day Homo sapiens.
Is that a psychological issue though, Charles? That's a mental thing. And
about the Garcia that killed all the people in Texas a month ago.
He was Latino, Mexicano,
and he had all the white supremacy.
He had all the swastikas, and he was a white supremacist. What the fuck? And then I think
explain. Okay, I got the question.
Okay.
Here's the question. We were talking about with Moyo when he was here earlier today that there's a Mexican Republican congresswoman who we go oh my gosh, how is it that a black man sells out the black man or Latino sells out the Latino? Somebody from do you have an opinion on that? Because if you look in the mirror, so many people they act keep it to Latinos, that we call them blue-eyed Colombians, blue-eyed Mexicans. Well, they come here and they think they're all white.
I think Cesar addressed it earlier when he talks about emulation. When you want to emulate what you've been inundated with. If you've been inundated with the notion that somehow people with depigmented skin are better, and that's been enshrined and institutionalized,
which it is,
then human beings have a tendency to want to navigate in the direction of what they believe is superior or better. It is an illusion, but if it's an illusion that's taught and entrenched long enough, people embrace that. Most human beings are basically followers. Most human beings do not think independently. They follow in herd-like fashion. Example, point in case, Trump's followers. That's a cult. These people buy what he says, hook, line, and sinker, because human beings have a tendency to follow in packs. We don't think independently. Einstein said we use maybe 10% of our brains at best. We don't even use that tool.
That's the herd mentality you're talking about.
It's the herd mentality. Yeah. And human beings have it across the board.
Well, I last time we talked about the history of otherism, and I know you and I have had this discussion before, and I think it comes down to that. He had read some study about how
Clayman?
a simple a coin flip or something. I don't know if you want to explain that again, but how something as simple as just because I said so is enough to divide an entire group.
Excellent recapping.
Yeah, it's something like that. I mean, I didn't read the study, but we've always believed that when you think about the indoctrination, you said that if you think about the public education system, and this is where sometimes my kids' teachers have problems with me because you're
too smart.
Well, no. I don't mind being told, no, this is how we do things and this is the process, because they teach things differently now. What I don't like is when you say that the way that they're doing it is wrong, even though it isn't. If everybody learns differently, I love using the example of math because I love math. Something as simple as 2 + 2 = 4. Most people can count on their fingers and they can figure it out. But I can give you 15 different algebraic equations right now.
It depends on the kind of 2 and 4 you're talking about.
But you get what I'm saying. I can give you 15 different algebraic equations right now to solve that simple problem. And every single one in this room could pick a different equation. We'll still get the same answer. The problem is we think different. Everybody's experiences, your brain is just programmed, and there's not one and the same. And so when you start talking about the indoctrination, they teach you to shut the fuck up at a young age. Since I can remember in pre-K, I would be in rooms where I would be the victim of racism or something from a teacher. But I was always taught, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say nothing at all. Keep your opinions to yourself. Basically, shut the fuck up. I don't want to hear it.
Well, I like what you told the story of Elizabeth and you at Lincoln Middle.
It was at Lincoln.
This is the
first of all, my sister and I should never be in the same room at all.
But that's a different issue. We'll talk about that in a psych program.
Many reasons. But we were in the same classroom. She was in 6th grade. I was in 7th grade. And it was at Lincoln media class or whatever, Mrs. Myers. And I'm not afraid to say her name. She's still alive. If you hear this, I hope you do. She was the teacher And I remember on the first day of school, it's like, oh, introduce yourself. What do you want to do when you grow up? Right. So Elizabeth was a little further on down the rows from I was. I was always cool, right? Sit in the back. And she was a nerd, so she sat in the front.
But she's a graduate of Harvard, by the way.
Is,
but that's another story.
She's exactly.
And you're
she's
not.
a nerd. She's a nerd. But I remember she said, oh, my name is Elizabeth Garcia, and I want to grow up and I want to graduate from Harvard one day. That was her goal. And reflexively, you're talking like normal conversation. This is some shit she's probably said her whole life.
All the time. Know that girl.
She goes, oh, honey, you're lucky if you graduate and don't get pregnant.
Teacher.
That was her response.
The teacher.
Now, when I tell you, look, her and I fight a lot and we don't agree. It just talking about it.
I hear it a lot.
Just talking about it. I can't tell you the fucking how mad I was, because without her having to turn around, I could tell she sulked in her chair. Her spirit was shot.
Your sister.
Yes.
But there's a silver lining to the story.
Oh, okay, so then I ended up going to Mr. Wallace's office because I told her to fuck off, and I got in trouble because that's my sister. Don't talk to her like that. We get home and my dad does everything he can to console her, and he says, you know what, you prove her wrong. Fast forward.
Can I tell this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I tell this? Because Elizabeth invited me to a graduation party. Now, she invited that teacher too, didn't she?
Yep.
And she didn't come, did she?
She did not.
And that was her graduation party from Harvard. Amazing story.
We went to that class. Elizabeth had printed out these invites. We went, and it was one of the proudest moments. And I remember we learned something that day. My dad taught us that. He said, you know what? I guarantee if you go to the school, she's going to be there, because people usually stay where you leave them. And I swear to God, she was in the same exact classroom, teaching the same exact thing. Years later.
Real success.
And my sister says, you know what, Mrs. Myers, I want to thank you.
Yes, I remember this.
Because if it wasn't for you, what you told me, you probably don't even remember. I'm now going to graduate from Harvard. And it was one of those buildings, Ramon, full circle moments in our lives. But when I tell you that we grew up that way, I went to Palmetto High School on my freshman year. They said, oh, most of you aren't going to graduate in this class, but if you learn something in this construction tech class, I guarantee you'll make more than minimum wage at McDonald's. Boom, right out the gate. What are we teaching? That's why when he says not all
Latinos.
educators are like, no, so we have been told things differently. Things are, he was talking about the way he was raised. And the education he received was the same education I got. I just happen to have a different point of view.
No, they look. My dad tells us, he's an old guy. He's passed. And he was a little kid, and he wanted to be in the Catholic Church. He wanted to be the altar boy, I guess you call him, right? And the nun told him he was too stupid. Right? It affected his entire life. Later on, just not long before he passed, he's telling me the story that we're talking about my grandfather that served in World War I, and he came back a little disturbed. That was one hell of a war. And he said, my dad didn't like the military at all. He was totally against it, even though he served in the war. He was a real combat dude. And so much so that I got an award at the VHF for school, and he didn't even want to show up. He didn't even show up with my mom. I said, stop, Dad. What did you get an award for? Well, I got the best grade in eighth grade or whatever. I was the highest scoring student. All my life, I've only heard how stupid he was from this nun. Not that he was the highest scoring achiever in school, but that nun screwed him up for the rest of his life. Now, let's talk about Latinos and African Americans and kids in school that want to achieve. How do we talked about, let's bring this full circle, the nation founded on racist ideology. Our old friend used to be an attorney here, always used to say that, well, everybody was racist. All societies are okay, but we're blacks are racist, Chinese are racist, this are racist. Okay, but we're dealing with the American experience, the U.S. experience rather, not the I hate. By the way, I hate when they say we're American citizen. That's an insult. My dad taught me that. He used to go ape about that. We're citizens of the United States of America. North America, by the way, includes Mexico. And Canada is part of
all of Central America.
So every time we say we're American citizen, dude, you're a dumbass. When I hear that, I say even presidents, even congressmen, even DeSantis, we're not American citizens. We're citizens of the United States of America. We're U.S. citizens. Anyway,
They're
that's
so
my 2
racist.
cents.
All the Mexicans from Guatemala and Honduras. That's how they refer to them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so stupid and ignorant.
Yeah.
They don't even realize how the geography. They need to be taught better.
But how do we? This is one of the reasons Unidos was founded. Another reason was to empower young people. There was a song by some group in California. No soy de aquí, no soy de allá. It's a song about I'm not from here, I'm not from there. A whole generation of Latino kids that speak a little bit of Spanish, but their Spanish really sucks, and they're not biliterate, so they don't really write.
Los no sabo
And
kids.
then they speak English, but their English really sucks, and they can't really read and write. And then they might be under deportation, and they get sent back to someplace they're not from, but they don't feel they're from here. The whole idea was to empower. How do we get Black and Latino and people of color and other kids, maybe white kids that are poor, to believe in themselves and change, these foundational issues that we talked about, and we're trying to get people to think, how do we make this better? Because all we're doing has been about bitching out about everything is bad.
Yeah, I think what he stated earlier about education is very important, because behavior is preceded by ideas. If you want to get people to do certain things, get them to believe it, get them to think that way, and they'll behave accordingly. So if you can change the mindset, and you can uneducate in a sense and re-educate.
But who does that?
But teachers do that.
Okay, so but that's why maybe is that why DeSantis is
in
trying
Florida
to get
is one
in?
of the worst places
But
for teachers right now.
Hey.
Teachers are under attack. They really are, and not
Well,
everybody.
I don't know. I want to hear. I want to hear. I want to hear.
Resolve.
You're not a teacher. What
Not
does the
everybody
teacher
has
have
the
to say?
resolve that Mr. McKenzie has over
But
here.
somebody has to have it, though.
This is
we
true.
We cannot curse the darkness. We have to take the energy that we have.
We cannot curse
and
the
be
darkness.
creative with it. No, we have to be creative with it. And I must do my part. I cannot speak for someone else, and I cannot walk their path. But I can do what I believe I should do to make a difference. I think it was Gandhi that said, and Gandhi had his own issues. He had racist sentiments.
That is true.
I'm familiar with that. But there was some good from that. And one of the things he stated that I embrace is be the change you'd like to see in the world. And I believe that. Now, when it comes to the historical annals, we have to consider this when we talk about slavery, for example. Most whites in the South did not own slaves.
Right. They were too poor.
Most of them were tenant farmers.
Right.
And it was the rich landowners that provoked them to think in terms
But why then so many of the white people that come from the lower strata of the economy that don't benefit from them are some of the biggest racists?
It's the myth of white solidarity that led to that.
Okay.
You are not as wealthy. You are not as powerful, but at least you're not that. You're not.
It makes
black.
you feel better.
Yes.
And I'm Dominican. I'm not Haitian.
When everybody
I'm Puerto
in the
Rican,
class
I'm not
gets
Dominican.
it, when you're the
False
only one in
notion
the
of
class who gets an
superiority.
F, you feel like shit and like a dumbass. But when you start asking around and everybody else has an F, you don't feel so bad anymore because now you're part of a group. It's true. It's true. But that's a very simple way of putting it, because I mean, we have a tendency, if you want to talk about the Bible, right? Because I have someone who I that can speak on the subject.
We have two semi-ministers. He was ordained at one time, and he turned out to be.
Well, that's some very interesting things to say about the Bible.
Yeah, but I'll tell you one thing. The only one thing one of my favorite stories, I call it one of the stories of Jesus, was when he was talking about the 10 lepers. And what always got to me, I was like 16 years old and I was reading this because I was getting ready to do a sermon or whatever. And then I was reading it. It was late on a Saturday before Sunday. And it hit me. Why were they together? Why were these 10 lepers? They were the outcasts of society. Why were they together? And I kind of got on that. And I started, because at the time I had gone through the 90s in Palmetto, which there was a lot of the brown side and the brown this and the norteños and the Canal Road and all this other shit was going on. All these gangs, these little clicas that were happening. Okay, people want identity. What we talked about earlier, they want to feel like they belong to something.
Right.
You just mentioned. So I actually made a whole sermon about how the lepers and how we're like the lepers. We just want to belong to something, and talked about how God can accept everyone and stuff. But the idea of that is exactly what I think you were talking about right now. The poor not slave owning white guys that wanted to be a part of something better. And so instead of feeling left out, it's called FOMO.
But we always want to feel better than what we
Yeah.
are. don't we? It's sort of like Facebook. Nobody really puts what they really are. They project stuff that they want to be.
But even when it came to the tenant farmers who were white, there were historical incidents of blacks and whites coming together and forming communities in solidarity. And I forget the name of one historical movie that's out there that's pretty popular, but it wasn't across the board.
Right.
And I think that's what we have to be careful of too, that we don't paint with a wide brush everyone.
It's not a blanket statement.
You can't make a blanket statement about that because human beings do divert.
Well, one of my things, Charles, is that.
Let me make a case in point. Look at him, for example. He's a white man.
Yeah, he looks white.
But he does not embrace
Sort of pinkish.
what we would consider right-wing, conservative, evangelical, white, Anglo-Saxon.
He ain't that. No.
And his color has nothing to do with his mindset. He has a different mindset. He's a brilliant young man, and he has a different mindset that has nothing to necessarily do with his pigmentation.
Right.
And so if we walk into this room and say, oh, there's a white guy, I know where he's coming from, we'd be totally erroneous.
And that right there is the problem that I personally have with this is the reason why woke has become such an antagonized thing, because there is a very large movement of younger people, the younger generations, that want to blanket statement that. And I'll give you a very personal example. Within my own circle of influence, I've heard from the woke family members, oh, hey, you're a man, shut the fuck up. It's like, don't tell me to shut up. Oh, you
got issues with women power because you're sisters.
No. And then they go, oh, well, you're talking like a man because you're privileged for being a man. Well, okay, fine, whatever. But then they go, it's like, you know what? And then all white people are bad. It's when you start talking about in those terms, I think you've lost a bit of the credibility, in my opinion, because CJ talked about this yesterday. He was talking to a group of people who, majority of them consider them good Christians, right? The power of forgiveness, right? And that doesn't just go. That doesn't just go around the people around you. That's a historical thing. There's this argument that's going around about generational trauma and how that's passed down over the generations, right?
Yes.
Okay, at some point, and this is just my personal opinion, I'm not voicing for it. I believe at some point, grow the fuck up. Get over it. It didn't happen to you. Yes, I've suffered racism. I've been at the hands of, great. I could choose to mope and bitch about it all day and do nothing. Or we could try to be productive and do something, regardless of what you think the system is or isn't. And that's where sometimes rubber meets the road, because there's people that all they do is get on Facebook or social media, or they write about and that's great. But what I think CJ's trying to get at, how can you do something that's going to make an actual impact?
Well, I was talking to Charles before the show. I hadn't seen him in a while. I know he traveled to Haiti and he's doing all these wonderful things. And he was talking sort of down for me. And one of the reasons I love Charles is that I think I'm starting to understand we've been down the same road politically and try to run for office and do things like that. And then as I'm getting older, I realize, a lot of the people that win, I have very little respect for. They don't do anything. They're just taking a place. It's the people that make a difference. Is that when you touch that child in school and you teach them, or you empower that young mind to be everything they can be. I spent a lot of money doing that indirectly with Unidos and other programs and people, but you do it every day when you are in a classroom, and I can bet you there are generations now, I hate to say that, of children, of adults now, who have been positively influenced by you, that think differently because of you. And if they don't realize it right now, one day they will. I'm sure they've even approached you already. I'm sure they have. Because you are one of the most successful people I know. Because money, I hate to tell you guys, seems like a nice thing, but it you got to have something else. You got to wish for something else. Our society puts too much emphasis on money and material things, that to the point where it destroys families. We forget about the soul that our families have and our kids, and we forget about what's important. We do not celebrate and honor teachers like the Japanese do, I think, and other societies, because at the end of the day, if you're that teacher, you are making a fraction of what you should make. But if you're a good teacher, you're changing the world. And God forbid, when you leave this earth, I know damn well that you've done something, and you've made a difference, and you made a better place for everybody. You get elected, maybe you don't do that. Maybe you're not that influential. Maybe you're sitting in Congress and talking a lot and doing things, but by you staying here and talking to people and touching people and doing these kind of programs and doing other things, maybe one person, God forbid, one person sees a show and leaves a better person. I think we're all a success.
I think, and this is my own spirituality, if you would. I think that at the end of this process that we call life,
Right.
what will matter the most is not bank accounts
Amen.
and prestige,
I agree.
names in the lights, and all those kinds of things. But what will matter the most is the lives we touch and the way in which we touch them. And I think that's what we survey about our lives
Right.
at the end of this process. Jesus made a statement, or at least it's recorded he made a statement, because I did say I was going to say something about the Bible. KJV, which is from the Latin Vulgate, scholars think is probably the least reliable.
Yes.
And we have none of the original documents
Absolutely.
for the Bible at all. There
We can talk about that stuff one
but
day.
there are some
King James.
There are some principles enshrined in that, and one of the things he's credited with saying is that as you do it unto the least of these, you do it unto me. And I think what Jesus was trying to help us understand, as other masters did, and some people object to the word master, I'm talking about spiritual maturity here, is that we're connected, we're one, and when you enrich another life, you actually enrich you, because what goes through you sticks to you, and what you plant, you reap.
All I know is when I give, I receive so
You
much.
receive, and it's not
Yes.
necessarily.
I do it for
it's not-
selfishness sometimes.
Yeah, and hey, and it's good that you admit that, because the part, like you said a moment ago, you have to admit you're alcoholic in order to be healed, in order to go through the process of becoming healed. Because they say, well, once you're an alcoholic, you're always one. You're just a recovering alcoholic.
Right.
Well, that's what people say. That's somebody's opinion.
Right.
But I do think it's important for us to recognize where we are. If we want to take real honest inventory of where we are, then we can assess where we want to go. And my life philosophy was taken from others. It's not original to me.
Nothing is.
But the people I admire were people who were giving themselves to enrich the lives of others.
Do you think there's another MLK walking around? Are there people like that? Is him, a Gandhi?
I was going to say that if you think about other people that we talk about, and most of the people that we quote or that we may look up to or that we study from history, most of them weren't elected officials.
No.
The people who changed history, the people who changed the way we do things. I mean, you think in the Latino community here in the United States, it is Cesar Chavez.
Cesar Chavez,
right? And everything that he did for the migrant workers.
Great.
Right, and the rights that he was able to obtain in many ways, we benefit from that. We benefit from Martin Luther King and what he did with the civil rights movement and all the leaders of his time as well. So
yeah, because we forget about that the civil rights movement doesn't happen with one guy, does it?
Exactly. I mean, and it goes back to, when you're talking about, okay, ¿cómo podemos arreglar el problema? I don't think you can. But what I think you can do is make a step. One thing that I've always said is, I might not amount to a hill of beans in my life, but the day I die, I want to leave something. even if it's just a stepping stone. If the next guy, it doesn't have to be my kids, doesn't have to be anybody I know. The next person that comes up, if I could have opened a door even just a little bit, and they come in, they kick it wide open. It's about the future, the generations.
Okay, we've talked about where we've sort of been. We talked about the problems. As this show is going to end soon, the thing that I want each of you to talk about is, if somebody's listening to the program, what would you say to inspire to help change the problem with wokeness, the problem with racism, whatever problem that they see, or the things, like I always say, oración, orar con acción, prayer with action, because people of faith don't ask for the change, be the change, do the things. What is it that each of you, I'll start with you, Charles, what would you tell somebody, a young person, a person that has maybe lived to 40 or 50, and they have, they've made money. Do they have a response? I mean, tell me, what would you tell somebody? What would you counsel? We got some.
I think the theme that I would beat over and over again, and this is what I intend to spend the rest of my life doing.
Okay.
Is that human beings have to graduate to the point where we realize that we're connected. We're not separate.
Okay.
That's a primitive notion, and it has led to all kind of havoc in the world. When we see that what happens over here shows up over there. If we study history, when we see that what we do to another, we do to ourselves.
Right.
Then I think that will make a cataclysmic change in our path.
But how do we get there, Charles? How do we get there?
We get there by programs like this. We get there by the process of education. We get there by living that. If you live that with others, where you embrace others as a part of you, you may not agree with them. Now, to say that we're all connected does not say that we're all the same any more than the 5 fingers on our hand. 5 fingers on our hand are individuated, but they're all a part of one hand. And I think the human race has to get to a place where we realize that we're one. That does not mean we're all the same. Doesn't mean we're all going to agree on everything, but we're still connected. Just like the air in this room is the same air you find in every room and outside. All of it is connected. That's what I would say, that you come from the mindset, ultimately, each of us, because I believe there's only one entity, and you call it whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It's the energy of the universe. It is the force that makes all of life possible, is one. That's all there is. And everything else is some individuation of it, like waves on the sea.
So, but what do people have to do, if anything, outside of live this connectedness?
I think the golden rule that we say Jesus taught, and there were other teachers who taught it, as you would that others do unto you, do you even so to them, because you are connected to that person. You're actually different versions.
So start treating people
the way you want to be treated.
Immigration, politics, law, anything.
All of it.
Wow, profound words. Cesar, it's hard to follow Charles.
I'll follow Charles by disagreeing with him.
Okay.
I don't think you should treat people the way that you want to be treated. That's very selfish, I think.
Oh, you are selfish. We know that.
I think you need to treat people the way that they want to be treated. I think we spend so much time projecting ourselves onto other people and not enough time trying to figure them out. Because at the end of the day, if what he's talking about, I do believe it's one energy, it's one universe. We're connected. We think differently. We see differently. We have different lived experiences. But we share something in common, which is our humanity. And I think at our core, humans, we're not born evil. We're not born racist. We're not born with prejudice. We become that way based on our surroundings, societies, upbringing, etc. So one thing that at least me recently have been trying to do is how can, instead of because I like to be treated a little rough. I'm soy masochista, as we say in Spanish. You know what I mean? Slap me around a bit. I'm okay. Yeah, exactly. I'm a masochist in that sense. Now, I'm more rough in nature, and I react to it. I respect it, and because that's how I am. But if I talk the way that I like to be talked to, for example, just we don't have to go far to Nancy, my partner, right? She'd cry. I can't talk to her that way. She doesn't respond to it. She doesn't. I had to over years figure out how I can work with her in that sense, because it's at the end of the day, you do what you can. So I would say take more time to listen, and you listen to understand, not listen to respond. And when you start doing that a little bit better and a little bit more,
You've been talking to my wife?
no, I'm just talking from personal experience, because I have had a hard time recently, even with my own family, practicing this, because we have issues just like everybody has issues, and extending the same grace you want extending for yourself, extend it to other people. When you can start doing that, I think we can move forward.
I think you just restated what I said.
He's not. He's going to do that, Charles. Yeah, you got to understand.
There's
Cesar.
no original idea. I've heard, didn't I hear that? Everything
I want
is
to be
just a
treated rough. That's all. Of all he said, I want to be treated rough.
You want
That's
to be
all.
treated?
Yeah, I'll treat you rough, my friend Clayman, Mr. Kidd. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, a couple things. I think creating a golden rule is tough, because the do unto others as you would have them do unto you doesn't always apply. I think that if you look at it from the situation of do unto them as they want you to do unto them, I think that's not always great either. What if they want you to be their servant for life? Well, that's not really good for you, so it doesn't really work that way either. A golden rule put into one sentence is very tough, so I'll just kind of stray from that a little bit and say I think it would be incredibly useful if everyone was more skeptical of information being presented to them. Not just the content of the information, but skeptical of the person giving them that content. Before you ask yourself, is the thing I'm hearing true? You should ask yourself, what does the person telling me stand to gain from me believing that it's true? So we have here, the Florida legislature wants students to believe the fundamental truth that all persons are equal before the law and have inalienable rights. In Florida, that's just on its face not true. A felon can't vote. A felon can't own a firearm, participate in jury service. A felon under the Constitution doesn't have the right to not be an enslaved person. So I think it's incredibly important for people to be skeptical when someone is telling them something that they believe to be true. Or at least if they say, this is something that's true, ask yourself, what could they possibly stand to gain from me believing that? And then with that skepticism in mind, go out and vote. Get these people who are fascists and lying to you out of office.
Fair enough. Now, I'm going to do something, just pull out of the air, and it's not going to be fair to two of you. Let's finish this with some quote. If you have a quote from somebody that you respect, that you want to leave to the audience. So I'll start off. I always use Ian Kershaw, a Jewish historian. I use it all the time. The road to Auschwitz was built by hate, but paved with indifference, right? We have to get involved. I always love that. I think that every I always thought, if I were in World War II and I was a German father with my little daughters, and I lived down the street from Auschwitz, or in this case near Dachau, which I visited, what would I do? And my life was pretty good. Would I stand up and do something to help the Jews and the others that were killed there, that were massacred? Or would I just keep my head down and just live my life, and it's not my problem? The indifference is something that really disturbs me. When does it become, so they're only after the Jews, they're only after the Hispanics, but what happens when they come after you? They'll get this group, then that group. What is it, Charles, that you want to say, or you think you can?
This is what I would say. I would say this. I would say, because we're one, and I believe that. I also believe that what goes around comes around. And I would say there's no such thing as an absolute right or wrong. That's a moving feast. But there is such a thing as what serves us as a species. And somehow we have to get to the place where we realize that we're connected and that what goes around comes around. And we must move toward what serves us as a species.
Is this a McKenzie quote, or is this something you've gotten?
It's a combination of things from others and sort of my own, which is paraphrasing.
I have a Charles McKenzie. We are on the right side of history. I don't know, you were giving a speech somewhere, and it sort of sounds like an MLK thing, but I remember you saying that, and I have it written down here.
Yeah, that's kind of a general thing.
I know that, but
No, that what I just stated is what I would say. I'd say we have to come to realize that we're one, and it's not about what's right or wrong. It's about what serves us as a species.
Awesome. Mr. Garcia? You find
I
something?
always quote this one, but I didn't want to butcher his words, and I think probably Reverend McKenzie knows it better than I do.
Okay.
But MLK said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And to me, that's always brought a little bit of hope that no matter what, over time, things do get better. And they're not perfect, and they never have been. But I think that we should strive towards that. And it's a slow process. It's not going to be fixed. It wasn't fixed in the lifetimes before us. It might not be fixed in ours, but as we go forward, they do get better.
Awesome. How about you, Clayman? Anything you want to say?
I'm personally a big animal rights guy. I like your message of connectedness. I think that if people were empathetic towards not just other people, but also animals, we would be better off. So my quote is from M. Frida Hartley. It's, "From beasts we scorn as soulless, in forest, field, and den, the cry goes up to witness the soullessness of men."
Awesome. Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Hey, Charles, I this is absolutely the last thing. I want to put you on the spot. I know you don't like this because it's about you and not MLK. But what is, do you have something from MLK to leave the show with? From the street sweeper to whatever. You don't have to deliver it as MLK as you've done before, but do you have anything and studied the man's? Is that fair to say? I mean, you were a student of his.
I think what falls in line with our discussion tonight is the statement that he made that all things are tied. We are all tied together in a single garment of destiny.
Okay.
Bound by an inescapable network of mutuality, and what affects some directly affects all indirectly, because we're connected. We are inextricably bound. I think that really culminates in expressing where I am now in terms of my philosophical.
Thank you, Charles. I want to say I love you. You're a great man. Known you for years. Cesar, Clayman, a lot of respect, a lot of love. Thanks for watching the show, Café con CJ. And please tune in and tell everybody about it if you like it.
Subscribe, like, and follow.
Yeah, listen, sin pelos en la lengua. We got to do some more Spanish, but maybe the next show you can speak in Spanish the whole show. That'll work, okay? Thank you. Thanks for watching. Thank you. Thanks for listening.